Hey everyone, it's Michael Zipursky, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm very excited to have Mike Rowlands joining me today. Mike, welcome.
Great to be here. I've been looking forward to our conversation. We've had to reschedule a couple of times, so I'm really glad that we're now sitting here and able to have a juicy conversation together.
Yeah, and we are actually literally in the same city-ish. I mean, probably about a 30-minute or so drive from each other. So it's fun to do these virtually when we're so close. Most of the people that I tend to have on the podcast are somewhere else in the world, not necessarily in the same city. So it's always nice to have someone local. But your business, Junction Strategy, goes beyond the local Vancouver area, and you are the
Yeah, that's
president
right.
and CEO, right, of Junction Strategy, which is a social impact and social purpose consultancy. Your clients include some very well-known organizations like Adidas, Doctors Without Borders, the UN, a whole bunch of others. And if I'm not mistaken, Mike, you have offices in Vancouver, Toronto, and London, and then serve clients all around the world.
Yeah, that's right. We've had the opportunity to work on 5 continents. So we really have spanned around the world. We even had an office for some 4 years in New Delhi in India. So we served a lot of largely health and health NGOs and
Mm.
companies in Southeast Asia. So we, at one point, we literally were open 24 hours a day across all our offices. But you're right. Today we're about 20 people, and we're Vancouver, Toronto, and London, UK.
What were you doing before you assumed the role of president and CEO of Junction?
So it actually goes back to the dot-com bust way back 2001 too. Out of university, I'd worked for an advertising agency and had a fantastic experience. The owner of that agency was the first real mentor that I'd had, other than my father. His name was Bruce, and I still see him from time to time. But I'd started at this advertising agency and quickly got really, really interested in how organizations communicate externally, but also
Mm.
internally, and how the connection between culture and marketing worked. But dot-com boom time, that little advertising agency was acquired by a web development firm. And the whole dot-com thing was everybody needed to have a website, and everybody had to, they were calling it a land rush, right? There are lots of
Sure.
comparisons to the gold rush. Um, so they were all sorts of venture capital flying at all sorts of business models, and some of them were brilliant and some of them were not. Um, but it was a fascinating time to be in business because we were all so convinced that this internet thing was going to change the way the world works. And in many ways it has. But we built an interactive agency about 5 or 10 years before anybody used the phrase interactive agency. And it was really interesting because we were doing online and offline communications, thinking about internal engagement for staff as well as external engagement for customers.
Mhm.
And we did very well, worked with some amazing clients, built that company up to about 110, 120 people, something like that. And then the dot-com bust happened. And it was so dramatic. 2001, the owners and management of that company couldn't keep up with the downsizing. So they did a
Mm.
really heavy layoff in the spring. Maybe it was the April of 2001. 3 or 4 weeks later, they realized they hadn't cut deep enough. So they did another round of layoffs, 4 rounds of layoffs through 2001. And I was finally let go on November 16, 2001. Why do I remember the date? Because I was laid off on my wife's birthday. Happy
What
birthday, sweetheart. I don't have a
what a
job.
gift. Yeah.
What a gift indeed. But it was the push that I needed, because I don't know that I would have had the courage to go out on my own if it weren't for the circumstance that I found myself in. So,
Mm.
it's November 16th, mid-November. We're in a recessionary time. The 9/11 attack had just happened. So the world's in turmoil. And it's nearly the Christmas holidays. So there's not many people paying attention to hiring, and there's not many jobs anyway. So the 2 or 3 opportunities that I did have sort of fell through. And by March of 2002, I had to hang up a shingle. I had to go out on my own. I had a great founding business partner for the first consulting firm that I had. Andy and I are still friends, though I don't see him as often as I'd like. But we created a company at that time called Octopus. And the company was focused on values-based branding. So
Mm.
I'd come out of communications. I was really interested in this thing that was being called branding at the time. And it wasn't about logos and colors and fonts. It was about the ethos of the organization. At least that's the way we saw it. So the thesis was, well, okay, we've just spent a few years experimenting with building a brand based on a domain name. That worked for some, but not for many. We've thought about building brands based on technologies or technology platforms. That's worked for some, but not for many. But one thing that we saw that was consistent across those organizations is all of them wanted to articulate their values because that was useful to help them make decisions. And the companies that did that really well seemed to be the ones that were successful. So we built some, at the time, pretty rudimentary IP based on how you help a group of leaders articulate shared values and then make decisions based on those values. And in the echoes of the dot-com period, that was golden. People loved that. It was a refreshing shift. And so we started to build a consultancy. And then, so that's 2002. We're now 20 years later. We've been through a couple of expansions and a couple of contractions. We've been through a couple of mergers. And now we're a social impact firm. So we've extended into really thinking about social purpose in business, really thinking about businesses' responsibility to the communities from where they draw their labor and to where they sell their goods and services. And the environmental crisis, of course, is a key consideration for a lot of leaders today in business. And so we've expanded beyond that sort of fundamental brand thinking to more broader shared values across communities and across humanity.
Yeah. I want to ask, so I had Whitney Johnson on the podcast just before this, I believe, in terms of how it'll come out. And she shared with me that a big launching point for her consulting business, Disruption Advisors, also kind of came on the back of IP and really developing some intellectual property in a specific area. When you say that, you also kind of launched or had a real initial momentum on the back of this IP, elaborate a little bit more. Like, take us back. What was that IP? Was it a paper, like a white paper, or kind of what did it actually look like? And once you had it, what did you do with it to be able to actually get it out there and create the impact that you're talking about?
Yeah, great question. So there's a couple of things that I think are really, really important on this for people that are aspiring to be consultants. One is that you got to have something distinctive. Like we needed to have a point of difference. Why work with us instead of the next guy? So we built that point of difference around this story of using values to drive brand. So values-based branding is what we called it.
Right.
So that was the story we were telling. That was the point of difference that we took to the market. And then the second thing that I think is really valuable, and this goes straight to your IP question, was you have to have a really distinctive experience that customers can enjoy, clients can enjoy. And so the IP that we built was actually a series of workshops that we took a group through to help them together articulate the values that they shared. And not just sort of putting, it's nice to put a name up and have a nice word. Courage is a beautiful value, and it's one of our core values at Junction.
Yeah.
It's just as important to really carefully define that value. And lots of companies do that, right? So you and I may have different definitions of courage. It's important if we're going to work together that we get on the same page. But the next piece that's really interesting is, okay, if our organizational culture is going to demonstrate that value, what are the behaviors that I'm going to be able to see in the organization? Because I can hire for those behaviors, I can train people against those behaviors, and I can coach people against those behaviors. So now I'm actually taking the values and turning them into sort of cultural pillars. So for us, it was about taking people through okay, let's ideate what is valuable to us. What are the values that we hold together? Let's make sure that we're all clear and on the same page about what we mean by those words. And then let's talk about how wonderful it would be in our organization if we as leaders and then all of the staff that we're going to hire over time live up to those values through particular shared behaviors that we could actually identify and see every day. So that was where we started.
And how many people kind of went through that initial series of workshops you put together around that IP and around that concept?
I'm going to say in the first couple of years, 2002-3, it was probably 10 to 20 organizations.
Okay.
And that model has evolved, but we're still using something really similar today.
Right. And how did you get those 10 or 20 organizations to take part in this? And just to add a little bit more, kind of really what I'm trying to get at is you've created this new concept or a different perspective, different way of seeing things. I would imagine for some that might be very exciting. They want to learn more. For others, is it worth their time? If these are busy executives, is it worth their time to actually show up and be part of these workshops? So was the workshop free and or paid? And how did you get people to actually say yes to something new?
Yeah, workshop was paid. It was part of our consulting engagements, and we embedded the workshop um, in the process to develop what the client thought they were buying, and that
Okay,
was the
so this was actually
visual brand.
part of the bigger
Yeah,
engagement. It wasn't just a solo kind of sole purchase of a workshop. It was
rarely.
rarely. Okay,
Yeah.
got
So the clients came to us wanting to rebrand or wanting to develop a brand for their new company. And what they thought they were buying was the visuals
it.
and the
Right.
nice turn of phrase and the tagline.
Yeah.
What we convinced them that they ought to buy was something a little bit deeper.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than having a subjective experience of graphic design and font choices,
Yeah.
let's have an objective understanding of the culture that we want to create and the values that we want to share, and
Mm.
then develop the visuals based on that story.
Yeah.
And that was pretty compelling. Like, it was sensible for a lot of people. It took it out of being this sort of fluffy creative exercise, as many people perceived it, and turned it into something that could be a little bit more enduring and had more meaning in the day to day.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so that was how you kind of took your initial IP to market. Um, and it sounds like from there, people started to kind of latch on, like, this is different. Did that create, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but like, was, and no pun intended, but was that, did that create word of mouth for you in terms of starting to be known? And like, I'm wondering, how did you go from rolling out this business where people are coming to you for branding work, right? So now you get them involved in this bigger process and you're doing deeper values-based work around that. But how does that lead to growing the business and getting more clients and growing engagement size? Kind of just walk me through what happened after you took people through this process.
Sure. Yeah. So it's been a really interesting evolution for us. It's that it's got a couple of sort of loops, feedback loops in it. So one was, yeah, we certainly got referral on referral. So the founding business partner that I had, Andy, is a tremendously good graphic designer.
Mm.
And I sort of brought the account management and the values based piece. So together we were a pretty great team. So we delivered fantastic work, and referrals started to come. That was wonderful. Fast forward a few years though, and we started to get we started to be asking clients the same question and repeatedly getting the same answer. Yes, we're going to bring the values piece, but what's your strategy as a business? Where are you aiming to go as a business?
Mm.
And oftentimes they didn't know, or they were just going into a round of strategic planning. And we felt that we needed to have the strategy in place in order to articulate the brand really effectively. Because
Mm.
our definition of brand is the public face of strategy,
Right.
right? It's how it is the tool through which you engage stakeholders in the strategic intent of the organization. But lots of clients didn't have the strategy. So we felt like we were sort of flying with one hand tied behind our back. That's a good mixed metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
So we extended the business and started to develop an approach to strategic planning that was similarly values driven. So sometimes we would start with the brand, start with values and develop the brand. Sometimes we would start with values and develop a strategic plan.
Mm.
But it was the values that was sort of the connective tissue of brand and strategy. So today, I would guess that certainly out of our Canadian office, the majority of the work that we do is actually strategic planning work.
Mm.
Um,
It's
and
really
then,
interesting to mention that, because it sounds like the breakthrough or the opportunity for this whole new line of service and product that you're bringing to the market came from asking your clients questions, from pushing a little bit and exploring and trying to identify like what's missing, and
yeah,
then identifying what's missing and saying, well, like, that's something we should probably work on together. Let's explore this, and that then turns into the majority of your business, or a big piece of your business.
yeah, that's right. And
Yeah.
then one of the loops that's come around is now we're developing these great strategic plans. Um, Now the question is, how do we help our clients to operationalize them really successfully? And
Mm.
that comes back to the question of culture. Do we have a culture that's capable of implementing the strategic plan?
Right.
And there's a couple of sides of that. On the one hand, I think as a consultant, if you've delivered to your client a plan that they're not capable of implementing, then that's a failure on the consultant's part. Like, you have
Mm.
to understand the capacity in the client organization. But on the other hand, capacity changes and flexes over time. So companies learn new capabilities, they develop new capacity, they bring in more people, they're able to do more. So a plan needs to be responsive to the capacity and the culture in the organization.
Yeah. how do you think about capacity in your own firm? Because you could kind of see that as your clients have greater needs, or there's just kind of opportunities or potential problems identified, as you mentioned, like you could say and make an argument for let's start implementing for our clients or supporting them to operationalize the actual strategy that we're developing with them. But that requires people, right? That requires more
Yeah.
resources, more infrastructure on your side. So how do you personally, Mike, kind of think about the balance between greater revenue opportunities to provide more services and more value to your clients, but at the same time, the opposing force of are we, and this is just kind of a question, are we getting pulled away from our core area of expertise, and are we potentially getting pulled into work that is less profitable? So how do you kind of think about that whole piece of the business?
Yeah, you touch on, I've always thought there's sort of a couple of models in consulting. People hire consultants because they need more capacity. So they need more people to do the work,
Mm-hmm.
or they hire consultants for expertise. And we have always been expertise consultants, not capacity consultants. So we're not intent on building 100, 200, 300 person firm that can deliver this operational capacity support. That's not
Right.
the business that we want to be in. We want to be in the business of these really high leverage moments of engagement with clients. Our mission statement is to help leaders build the success stories of the purpose economy. And we can come back to the purpose economy piece, but what we're fundamentally, the first verb there is help leaders. So
Right.
we're here to help you as a leader of your company and your organization make it more successful.
Right.
If we're going to do that, then it doesn't make any sense for you to then be dependent on us for ongoing
Right.
support, right?
Yeah.
We want to be there at those high leverage moments when change happens. But we don't want to be there as a crutch for our clients. They need to build the capacity internally if they're going to be successful for the long haul.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you're teach them how to fish. You're working with them to get them so they feel confident that they can provide for themselves. But you're not the one actually going out and fishing for them and delivering them the fish, because
Right.
then when you're gone, right, everything kind of falls apart. I'm really interested to then kind of transition our conversation, Mike, and to know a little bit more. Today, you have about 20 people, as you said. The firm at times has been bigger, it's been smaller. Here it is today, a global business with 20 people. Where do you spend your time? Like, what does your typical day-to-day look like as CEO, president of the company? Are you folks more on business development? Are you just working with team members? Like, walk us through what does your typical kind of day/week look like in your role?
Yeah, so I'm having a totally atypical day today. I came back from vacation last night and jumped into a couple of major client deliverables for this week that I wanted to be involved with. But a more typical pattern is about 10 or 15% of my time is still billable to clients. So I am still client facing. And it's really important to me, one, because I love the clients and the work that they're doing. It's super inspiring to be with them. But also it helps me keep a clear understanding of what the market wants, what the market's looking for, and where we may need to adapt or extend or change our services. So 10, 15% of my time is billable to clients. Most of the rest of the time is split pretty evenly between running our business, so leading the operations, leading the team, managing the finances, those sorts of pieces, and business development and sales. So I'm out in the world meeting potential new clients, pitching new business all the time. So that's probably 40% of my time, and 40% of the time is running our business, and then the balance is actually directly billable.
What's one thing that you've most recently delegated or kind of deleted from your day-to-day activities that you just felt was maybe holding you back or wasn't your highest value kind of area?
There's actually two things that have been total game changers for us. So I can't remember the time frame. I'm going to say like 3 years or so ago. We elevated a longtime consultant into a project director role, and her name's Chantal, and Chantal has built a project management office for us. So now we have a centralized framework to understand all the capacity across the whole team, and when we can take new projects on, when we can schedule them in, if we need additional contract support to deliver on them when the client needs them. But that project management office has been a total game changer.
Yeah.
And then the second piece, that one of the more recent hires we made, was for the first time to hire an operations director. And Melissa came to us from a much bigger company. She's brilliant. She's absolutely amazing. But she's taken off my plate a lot of the sort of day-to-day decision making within our business.
Mm-hmm.
And we're nearly complete sort of delegating the finance function of the business.
Right.
Just sort of designing the systems and the processes to make sure that it works really well.
Yeah.
But that's another massive shift, because she's just capable of thinking about that work in ways that I'm not. It's
Right.
like the finance function has never been my expertise. I know enough to run a business,
Yeah.
but I actually don't think I know enough to scale a business much beyond where we are now.
Mm.
So that I think is going to prove to be a game-changing addition.
And what would you say is one kind of activity or behavior that for you as a leader, you try and kind of recall, or it's bring it into your consciousness on a regular basis, like kind of remind yourself? Is there anything you tend to focus on or just feel is really critical to the success of the overall business, but specifically in your role as a leader?
There's two things again that cross my mind really quickly. One is quality control.
Mm. What does that mean?
Um, so we have a kind of a written and unwritten rule, a sort of a standard and norm at Junction, that nothing goes out without two sets of eyes.
Mm.
So no document gets to a client unless two people have had a look at it, and I'm often the second person. Not always. There's 20 people. There's lots of people that can cross-check a doc, but we always ask the critical questions to make sure that we're delivering the best quality product.
Mm.
And then the second thing that I'm paying more and more attention to over time, particularly as the team grows, is our culture.
Mm.
How comfortable are people? Where are the stress points? Who is experiencing more difficulty than others? And that's been really pointed the last couple of years during the pandemic, when we all shifted to home office. Some of us are super lucky and we've got single family homes and space. Others are, married couples living in one bedroom apartments in an urban setting, and there was no respite from being locked in. Really, really difficult times. Like, no surprise there's a mental health crisis following the pandemic, right?
Sure.
So just really paying close attention, or to the degree that I can, to all of the stresses and strains on each of the individual team members, and then doing what we can to make sure that everybody's able to operate at their best.
What does that look like to you? I mean, and if we could just break it down into a little bit more detail, is
Yeah.
there kind of a structure or a system that you use to have those touch points with your team members, or how do you kind of bring that to life in terms of actually checking in and making sure that the team is good and that the culture and the vision and the values are all, people actually living them?
So I have a business partner, Adam, and he lives in London. So he sort of largely runs the UK operation. I largely run the North America operation, but we try to behave like we're one team.
Mm.
Sort of, it's an accident of geography, but we behave like we're one team, regardless of where people are seated. Each of us, Adam and I, have regular one-on-one conversations with everybody on the team.
Mm.
So regular, it's like bi-weekly for some, it's monthly for others, but they're on a regular rhythm. So we're always checking in, and those check-ins are like, sure, we'll talk about the ongoing project and where they're finding success or not, but we're way more focused on how are you? How are things going personally for you? What can we do to make sure that life is good? As a social impact consultancy, we're particularly attuned to paying attention to the people's experience and the human experience inside the organization. It's really important to us.
Mm.
But by doing that, I think we've sort of done a leadership by example piece, where now everybody in the team seems to be checking in with one another. How are you? Can I help? We use Slack like lots of companies do, and one of our channels on Slack is asks and offers, and we've created this cultural habit of asking for support where you need it, and people tend to get pretty open about where they're getting stuck and where they're struggling. We've just got this really accepting culture of honesty inside the organization that feels really, really healthy. But people are also comfortable saying, okay, I've got a little quiet spot, I've got a little bit more capacity, I can offer it up to anybody who needs it. So it's both the asks and the offers that are important. And we seem to be sort of creating this norm in the culture of using that, which is just awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it really is, 'cause I think a lot of companies don't necessarily have that level of kind of transparency or alignment, where people really care about their team members as much as maybe the leader does. Is there anything that you've done, like very kind of intentionally and proactively, to create that kind of an environment? Is any exercise, any direct conversations?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So I always hesitate to use the word vulnerability because there are some problems with it. But Brene Brown has made vulnerability quite famous.
Right.
But vulnerability isn't what I mean by vulnerability is appropriate professional vulnerability, right? Use the word vulnerability when I'm in a room of people of color. Vulnerability takes on a very different meaning.
Mm.
So I mean appropriate professional emotional openness and accessibility. That doesn't happen by accident. That has to be demonstrated and led from the CEO, from the front of the room, from whoever's sort of calling the shots.
Right.
So Adam and I have very purposefully tried to be as open and embrace that kind of appropriate vulnerability and
Mm.
set the tone in that way.
Is there an example
Um,
like that you could offer? Again, you have to be whatever you're comfortable sharing, but I'm
yeah,
wondering like what does an example of that look like where both you or Adam were vulnerable and that maybe made team members feel like, hey, it's okay for us to also be more vulnerable or more open or more honest about certain things.
yeah. There's some things that we've written about. So there's a few people on the team, myself included, that had really difficult times with mental health, both during and prior to the crisis.
Mm.
Depression is a sneaky it's a sneaky thing. And you find yourself unable to work, sitting and staring at the computer for long periods of time and not getting anything done. And one of the things that really, really helps is actually to talk about it. But in our society, it is still quite closeted, right? Like we don't talk about those things. Mental health is only now becoming something that we actually talk about, is getting normalized. And
Mm.
that's taken a lot of advocates and a lot of campaigning, a lot of time to get to a place where it's more normal in society. So we've tried to be ahead of that. If we've been
Mm.
struggling ourselves, we've said so, we've named it. Um, and those are important moments for people because they see that you can show up as a leader in a different way.
Yeah. You mentioned that one of your team members, I think the kind of director of operations, came from a much larger firm.
Yeah.
And as you start building and scaling a consulting business, your people become, and the people that you bring in, it's not so much about the quantity, but really the quality of those people. And one amazing person can create the outcome or results of 3 or 4 people that don't
Yeah,
have
it's
those
true.
skills. So, but I think a belief that many consultants have is, yeah, as a small consulting firm, I can't get that kind of talent. It's somebody from a larger firm. Yet we've had that experience ourselves where we're able to attract team members who come from much larger companies. What's been your experience and kind of any recommendations or suggestions? Or I guess the question is like, why would somebody want to leave a larger organization with a more recognized name to come and work at a much smaller organization?
Yes, it's a totally fascinating question. In Melissa's particular case, she was really interested for her next career step to be with an organization that really leaned into social purpose.
Mm.
So she's taken a much lower salary than I'm sure she was making previously in a much smaller firm. But it seems like she's absolutely loving it because of the purposeful work that we do.
Mm.
And I think that's a big trend in our society. People really interested in aligning their sort of sense of purpose in life with their work.
Right.
Um, the I so the other thing, so I mentioned a couple of minutes ago that finance was never really my strong suit, but I've had a couple of staff members over the years that are MBAs that have done work in finance and that really understand the financial model of consulting firms.
Mm.
Um, I am now at a place where I reject the assertion that you can't afford to hire better people.
Mm.
I think the business model allows for pretty expensive people.
Mm.
Um,
And why is that? Can you just explain a little bit like why that's now clear to you where maybe before it wasn't?
so I think it's a question of leverage in terms of. So there's a fantastic book by David Meister about how to run a consulting business. And one of the things that he talks about is a really important metric in consulting firms is profit per partner hour.
Mm.
So it's a leverage piece, right? How much profit are you generating for each hour of effort that a partner puts into the business?
Mm-hmm.
And it's extremely high leverage. So you can actually the biggest cost in our business is certainly salaries,
Mm-hmm.
but we can increase salaries at a pretty significant rate and still generate sufficient margin to keep the business healthy and able to grow, like able to finance its growth. So I think a lot of times, particularly, I mean, I'll just speak for myself. Years ago, as an early consultant trying to build a business, I'm sort of looking at cash flow and trying to figure out if I can afford the next hire. But if you're at a place where it's not so much the cash flow, but you're really looking at the income statement, right? You're not worried about if you're going to be able to clear every check. You're actually worried about the ratios. It's pretty clear that you can hire better people and you'll get better results and better work. Now, you can't just snap your fingers and make massive change overnight, but the model allows for pretty healthy salaries for people. So put it into like the current context, we're what are we, 8.1% inflation expected for this year? But we're matching that for our salary staff raises. So we're not going to try and get to that over 2 years like a lot of companies do. We're just doing it. It's 8% minimum raise for everybody across the board this year. We don't charge super premium rates. We're fair value. You know, we're a niche boutique consultancy with particular focus areas. So clients will pay a little bit more because we're in that niche, but we don't charge like PwC rates. We're not hundreds and hundreds of dollars an hour. We charge a healthy fee. We think we're pretty accessible, and we deliver really good quality work. We do it as efficiently as we can. And we're able to pay decent salaries and give people, you know, lots of time off.
You mentioned that one thing that, you know, you pay attention to or are focused less on just the cash flow. Once you know the business is in a good place and you're not worried about making payroll, you're shifting more to focusing on like on the margin of the business and making sure that that's healthy. In your experience, what's a margin, you know, in percentage terms that people should be kind of thinking about or aiming for, where maybe right now somebody's running at a place where they're, let's say, at a 50 or 60% margin, or maybe even higher if they're a solo consultant. And so for them, I might feel like, well, I'm taking a lot, my margin is going to decrease significantly. But in order to scale, that's something that in most cases you need to do. So in your experience of building up to more people and, you know, fewer now at 20 people, what have you seen as a margin that you feel is a healthy and kind of acceptable percentage?
So we operate at a pretty high gross margin. It's probably 60 to 75%, I would think. The number I'm really interested, of course, is the bottom line number. What does the EBITDA throw out? And I think 10 to 15% is probably a reasonable target for a consulting firm. A lot of firms will aim for the 20%, but my experience, you're probably under investing in professional development. You're probably under investing in marketing if you're stretching to the sort of 20, 25% EBITDA. So we've found that 10 to 15% is a good goal.
And Mike, just to explain for those that may not be as familiar, right, with finance, the main difference between the gross margin and then your actual EBITDA or just kind of, you know, net margin, how would you describe the difference between those two?
So there's the revenue line at the top is what we charge the clients and what comes in, and it costs us a certain amount to deliver that. So we call that cost of goods sold. And at Junction, we actually put a portion of our salaries against that. So, you know, if you were to come and work with us and you're working 40 hours a week, 20 hours perhaps got billed to a client, so half of your salary goes into cost of goods sold, but the other half still has to be paid, and that's out of the other part of the income statement is the operating overhead.
Right.
So we might be able to operate the top piece, revenue minus the costs to deliver that revenue might deliver 60, 75%.
Right.
Out of that 60, 75%, we still have to pay for an office if we're leasing one. We have to pay for the leases on our computers. We have to pay for the other part of the salary that's not paid for by clients. And so that pulls the earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization down to that 10 or 15% number.
Yeah. So it's essentially everything else in the business that cost-wise that comes up. And then you have after paying salaries and so forth. Okay. So that's great. I appreciate you just explaining that for everyone out there. So the other question I have for you is, you mentioned right now an office, yet I know that we're talking right now and you're not in the office today. What percentage of your team is remote?
We're 100%. So we all have home office. That happened during the pandemic. We're all sort of scattered out to our homes. But we do have shared workspaces that we use just to get the team together or for meetings. So we have a membership in a space in Vancouver. We have a membership in a space in London. And then we use a variety of spaces in Toronto. And that's working really well for us.
Yeah, and so that's fantastic. I know a lot of people are concerned, or one of the, I should say, the concerns that people have as more and more people are shifting to remote or are kind of stuck there, is around accountability. If you're in the office with team members, you tend to feel like you have a better sense of what's going on. You can help to support people to be more accountable. What have you found in terms of any best practices or things that you do at Junction that you feel just really gives you a great handle on making sure that even if you can't see somebody, right, physically, but you don't have to worry as a leader, just you know that things are actually getting done. So how do you kind of think about that? How do you track that? What's worked?
Yeah, we kind of had an unfair advantage before the pandemic because we'd had the office in London for 10 years. So we were already sort of, the team was already split in half. And we had offices in Vancouver and London. So those subsets of the team were together. But we knew how to do like over communicate. We knew how to make sure the communication channels were open and fruitful. So we had those rhythms in place already, which made it relatively easy for us to go totally remote during the pandemic.
Mm.
In terms of making sure people are getting their work done, I have a couple of views on that. One is we plan our resources really carefully. Like we use an ERP system, a great American piece of software called Mavenlink. Software as a service is particularly built for small to medium consultancies and agencies.
Mm.
So it's like tailor made for companies like ours. So we forecast all our resources in there. It is our project management platform. So all of the communications about projects happen on that platform. So we can see everything related to any project across the whole portfolio there. And I know what Dallas has to be working on 6 weeks from now. I know what Chris has to be working on 6 weeks from now. So it's all forecast out.
Mm.
And we can adjust and load balance as we need to. But the other more simple answer to the question is, do you trust your people or do you not trust your people? Do you have sort of a generous mindset where you believe people really want to do good, meaningful work?
Yeah.
Or do you have a scarce mindset where you believe people will
Mm.
just take every advantage that they can? Um, we have a more generous mindset. We do really interesting work, and people come and work at Junction because they're really interested in that work and they
Yeah.
roll up their sleeves and they get stuff done. In fact, more often, we're coaching people to work less.
Mm.
Slow down on the overtime. You're going to burn yourself out. Take it easy. You don't need to be pulling all those projects through at once. Slow down. We're having that conversation more often than we're having the conversation about, hey, you look like you put a ton of time in this week. Is everything okay?
Yeah. Shifting for a moment to marketing. I know we start off the conversation. You were
Yeah.
how the workshops and the IP really kind of got things jump started. Here we are today. Nearing the end of 2022. What's working for you from a marketing perspective? What are you seeing that's bringing in the best quality leads or the most opportunities today?
The best opportunities come to us through referral. I think the best marketing any consultant or agency can do is great work. That's
Mm-hmm.
what's going to generate the most of it. So the overwhelming majority of the work is coming to us through referral. The second thing is anytime we can get out in the world as thought leaders, to coin a phrase, everybody wants to be a thought leader these days. But what that means, practically speaking, is do we have something distinctive to say that they want on a stage at a conference?
Mm-hmm.
And if we can get on a stage at a conference, chances are good that we're going to have the right kinds of conversations with the people in the room, and that's probably going to lead to business.
Mm.
So that's really big for us. And then we've been experimenting a bit this year with online advertising. We've never really done it before, but we're finding that LinkedIn is actually a really good platform for us to advertise on.
Yeah.
We've got a new marketing manager, Charlie, and he wrote some really, really great ads, and they went out on their they show up for the recipient as a message in their LinkedIn inbox.
Mm.
And we found that we get some really good attention from what appear to be C-suite kinds of personalities,
Right.
mid-career, senior roles, and we've driven quite a lot of inquiries through that early experimentation. So we're going to kind of double down on that in our next year.
If you could share a little bit more about that strategy, and we're also very active on LinkedIn. We found it's tends to be a much better platform for us as opposed to some of the other social channels. And of course, every business is different. You always want to think about where your actual ideal clients are and where they spend time. But for you, you mentioned the strategy, which on LinkedIn allows that you can essentially have, as you said, like an email delivered to a specific type of person, or right.
Yeah.
What's the content of that email? Is it for them to book a call? Is it to check out a resource? What's the actual kind of message look
Yeah,
like?
it's book a call or reach out to learn more or to start with an inspiring conversation. And there's sort of three cues to that call. So a lot of clients come to us because we're experts in the B Corp certification, benefit corporation certification. We've dozens of companies we've helped to achieve the certification, and that's something a lot of companies are interested in.
Right.
So one of the cues is, say, are you thinking about B Corp? Are you thinking about the benefits of being a stakeholder-driven organization? We've got lots of expertise in that. Call us if you want to learn more.
Mm.
Way better written because Charlie's done a great job, but that's
Right.
pretty
Yeah.
much the message.
Yeah.
The second one is, as you probably know, there's many companies and executives are really interested in this whole question of social purpose. Like, why does your company exist, and what's the redeeming value that's leaving in the community? So we have sort of a message crafted around that. Are you thinking about social purpose? Have you been able to articulate it yet? Are you operationalizing it? How's that going for you? Reach out if you'd like to learn more and have an inspiring conversation. And I can't off the top of my head remember what the third one is, but they all delivered pretty good returns.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You talk about referrals, right? As kind of being the bedrock, and the majority of where your business comes from. Is when you say referrals, are these mainly just people reaching out to you and you've had no involvement directly in that, or is there anything intentional, any strategy, any activity that your company is taking to generate more referrals?
We So at the end of each project, we're in a pretty good habit of doing a project debrief with our clients.
Mm.
And it's just a quick sort of, it's modeled on the after action review, that's pretty popular. But it's just an opportunity for us to sit with the client, say, look, how did that go? What were you expecting when you came into the project? How did it actually go? Was there anything that you would like to have done differently in retrospect? Is there anything where we could do differently, do better? And then towards the end of that conversation, we actually ask, would you be willing to write a testimonial for us about this project? And more often than not, they're happy to do so. And then would you be interested in referring us to somebody? And it's a pretty soft ask. Like, we don't ask them to give us names. We don't ask them immediately to make email intros. We just simply ask, would you be comfortable referring some colleagues or associates to us? And they quite often do.
Mm.
Which is lovely because it's a really good measure for us that we've done a good job on the client. Like, what better reward than having people sing your praises? But we've found that just that polite ask without overdoing it. Overdoing it can feel pretty uncomfortable for both parties.
Sure.
But just that polite ask does seem to cultivate some connections.
And is that something that you track? Like, do you look at which specific client is sending, which referrals and how many they send each year? Or is it just you make that kind of
We're
soft
just
ask?
starting to track that. Yeah. For a long time, it was, I could do it in my head. I can track a series of clients that came from a particular conference in a particular year. And so to see the daisy chain of connections. But the company's getting too big for me to be able to do that now. So we're just starting to track it with a CRM.
Right. I want to shift to talk about sustainability, or even more around this idea of social impact, social purpose. Uh, these are things that for many people, they kind of connect them to larger organizations. All right. They don't
Mm.
necessarily think about social impact or purpose as being as relevant for the solo independent consultant or the consulting firm with 10 or 20 people. Uh, what's been your, I guess, experience with that? And I think what I'd really love to hear from you, Mike, is what's the opportunity for the people that are joining us right now? They're listening in. They're wondering, okay, yeah, I have a consulting firm with 5 people or 15 people or 30 people, or it's just me. Like, is there any benefit to them to start thinking more about social impact? And if so, how would they actually bring that to life? What would be some tangible steps they might want to kind of take and explore?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think it's if we were having this conversation 20 years ago, we probably would be talking about sustainability, right? It was really about environmental sustainability and what's your carbon output and how much energy you're using, all important questions. And then maybe 10 or 15 years ago, if we were having this, we'd be talking about social enterprise and community benefit. Like, how supportive are you being of the communities from where you draw your labor and to which you sell your goods and services? Those things started to blend maybe 5 or 10 years ago, and sustainability sort of took on this overarching mantle that included social impact and community impact and employment satisfaction. All of these things fell under this umbrella of sustainability. We think that's evolved a little bit. And it's been interesting watching this conversation about social purpose in business over the last maybe 3 or 4 years. It's been some very, very high profile people that have talked about social purpose. And fundamentally, it's asking a question, why does your business exist? Now, every business has a purpose, right? Entrepreneurs start their business because they want to earn a living, or they want to create something, or they want to get rich. We're interested in companies that want to have a social purpose, where the purpose actually leaves a valuable legacy in community. And more companies are interested in that. We think it's a mega trend. I think maybe because of the environmental crisis, maybe because of the health crises, maybe because of all of the changes that are just happening in the world at this moment in history, more and more companies are interested in not just balancing, but making up for the externalized costs of our current industrial capitalist system, right? So for a long time, lots of companies were allowed to use the atmosphere as a garbage dump for byproducts of their services or products. We're not tolerating that anymore, because we're actually in an existential crisis, in a climate that could collapse. It's terrifying. The more I read, the more terrified I am. We're in a really, really urgent moment, and more people are cottoning on to that fact. And we're seeing that sort of shift in behavior emerge from grassroots organizations the world over. So one of the things that gives me hope in the face of the climate crisis is that there are millions of social entrepreneurs that might not describe themselves as social entrepreneurs. That might not be their language, but they're thinkers. They're in grassroots communities. They're developing enterprises, for profit or not, that are sustainable, that are healthy for the communities, that are healthy for staff.
And Mike, you're up, but I'm wondering, how that, let's take the example of the manufacturing consultant, or the pharmaceutical consulting firm, or the designer branding consultant, or the food and beverage consulting firm. What does all that mean to them? Like, how might they incorporate some of this into their practice? Or is there anything, like, maybe they don't actually want to incorporate into their practice, but is there something that they should be thinking about? Or what kind of advice might you offer to somebody that this is not their focus? They don't want to make their business about social impact because they're focused, let's say, manufacturing or food and beverage. But what else could they potentially do with this?
Well, there's lots and lots of data that show social purpose companies are more successful companies. They're more successful to thrive through a downturn. So they're going to be more durable, stable clients. So you should be bringing this thinking into whatever niche in an enterprise you're working on. Second, it is a phenomenal talent retention opportunity. As I said before, more and more people are thinking about social purpose and aligning their sense of meaning in life with their work in the world. If you're thinking in this way, if you're adopting this kind of practices, if you're interested in doing a little bit more and a little bit more, it helps you attract better staff, and it helps you keep them. Right? Retention goes way through the roof. So there's a significant HR benefit. But fundamentally, I think it's important not to ignore it, because it really is a mega trend. It's giving shape to manufacturing businesses, right? They're thinking about supply chains. They're thinking about toxins in their supply chains. They're thinking about labor in their supply chains. And if you're in operational consulting, you need to be thinking about that.
Yeah. You also mentioned, earlier on, that one of the big breakthroughs for you in terms of kind of new opportunities or a new service line around strategy came from asking questions and identifying, kind of a void. It seems to me like there might be a big opportunity for many consultants, regardless of what area you specialize in or what industry you work with, to start kind of exploring or asking questions, or kind of picking up, the rocks and looking at what's underneath them, as it relates more to social impact or social purpose or the environment or other things like that. It doesn't mean that your services necessarily are going to work specifically on that, but as a way to provide more value or unique perspectives or insights to your clients, it seems like there'd be some opportunity there for many people. Is there a resource? So let's say somebody wants to dive deeper, because some of the advantages that you just outlined, Mike, that can come from bringing this kind of mindset or behavior or practice into a business are pretty significant in terms of retention, in terms of the types of clients that want to be with you, HR benefits. Is there a book or a resource that you would maybe point to that you think would be a good primer for people to learn more about this topic?
So this might seem like an odd one, but actually the B Corp impact assessment is a beautiful primer.
Mm.
What the B Lab is, the nonprofit behind that assessment, and the B Corp certification is basically a quantified measure of the health of a company in 5 key areas. So how well is it looking after the environment? How well is it performing for customers, for workers, on governance, and then in the community more broadly?
Mm.
And it's a very complex rubric. It's actually a scoring tool, and there's an available 200 points, and you can certify as a B Corp if you can achieve 80 points. But the
Mm.
average company only scores about 50. I think it's 53.
Okay.
So there's a big delta between the average company and somebody that's able to achieve the B Corp certification. But simply reading that assessment and all of the things that you could do, not necessarily should do, right? Not every company has to do all of those things, right?
Mm.
And 80 is a fantastic achievement. I think the best B Corp is 160. Like nobody's actually achieved 200.
Is that like a
Um,
Patagonia or something like that, or?
it's like, yeah, like a Patagonia, or it's a bank, or it's a cooperative credit union or something. Like amazing companies, right? They're totally upheld as the gold standards,
Yeah.
and even they get only 160. But 80 is a phenomenal achievement. But my point is, as a reference, as a tool to just read all of the things that you could be thinking about under workers, all of these different labor standards and practices, under community, all of these different engagement and stakeholder engagement, transparency standards and supply chain standards, and so on. It's a really lovely catalog of all of the things that you could be doing to be a more healthy and sustainable business. And it changes all the time. It's constantly being refined and improved. So it's actually more difficult each time we recertify, which you're required to do every 3 years, than it was the time before. The bar keeps getting a little higher,
Yeah.
because it's just really current to what expectations are in the community.
All right. We'll definitely reference that in the show notes for people to learn more about the B Lab and the B Corp certification. Mike, I really want to thank you for coming on and having this conversation today. I know we explored a lot of different areas in terms of building consulting businesses, scaling consulting businesses, social impact and purpose, and a whole bunch of other stuff in between. I also want to make sure that people can learn more about you and everything that you have going on at Junction. What's the best place or the website they should maybe check out if they want to explore
Yeah,
that?
so junction.com, and we spell a little funny, JUNXION.com, junction.com. And we have a great blog on there. We also publish a lot of content in the insights section there. And there's bios of all of our team and lots of case studies. So we think it's a pretty valuable site. Folks are welcome there, and then they can reach out to me. No problem at all. Mike at junction.com. Always happy.
There we go. All right. Well, Mike, thank you again so much for coming on.
Thank you. It's been a treat. Really enjoyed chatting.